How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the 1IQ Sports Talk YouTube channel, and it is officially mock draft number 2. This is going to be a 2-round mock draft separated into 2 different videos, so it's going to be round 1, this video, and then tomorrow's video will be round 2, so make sure to stick around for that. But joining me, as always, is Sterling to kind of give his sense on some of the picks. Now, he hasn't gone through a lot of the same draft process that I have gone through at this point, but he can also give some valuable feedback as well. So, Sterling, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, no problem, man. I mean, I'm not as young as I once was. I used to do a lot of the draft process stuff myself too, and as I've gotten older, I've just been like, I only have so much off time. I don't want to spend it recruiting 20-year-olds anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's
I hear you.
I've just grown out of it over the years. I still look at it when we get closer to the draft, but not so much, September through January anymore.
Fair. But to kick things off, obviously the Tennessee Titans, they have the first overall pick in this year's draft class. And so we are using PFF's mock draft. I do think they have one of the more better bases that you can have for it. But to kick things off, it's not going to come as a shock. They're selecting Cam Ward, quarterback out of Miami. He's the best quarterback in this class in what is a really weak quarterback draft class. Tennessee, they can't continue on with the Will Levis experiment. We've seen way too many memes week to week. They have a head coach right now who is from that offensive mind. He needs a young guy that he can build around, and Cam Ward, he's a guy that I think you can feel comfortable with his cool, calm poise in the pocket. He's going to need a lot of help there, though. Like, this Tennessee team, they don't have a lot surrounding him in terms of weapons, run game. Their offensive line is better, but it still needs a lot of work. But ultimately, this is probably the best pick that the Titans can make.
Yeah, it's definitely an area of need, and I agree. Cam Ward is the best quarterback in this weak class. There's for me with Cam Ward, there's still just that red flag of how he quit on his team after he set his personal record in that Miami game at the end of the season. Like, I get it didn't matter, but at the same time, when you got a
You
guy
want
like
to see
that,
the guy play the full game if he suits
well,
up.
yeah, what happens when your team only has 4 wins and it's week 16? Are you just gonna go, I don't want to play anymore? So
Yeah.
that is a bit of a red flag for me on Cam Ward. But other than that, I liked everything I saw him do this year.
Now, moving to the second pick in the draft, and this is the Cleveland Browns. The Browns are in an unbelievably difficult spot because if this was, for instance, like last year's quarterback class, they'd be selecting a quarterback here. I don't think Shedeur Sanders is necessarily going to be the I'm not going here place, but I think when it comes to Cleveland, I think he will probably say, I'm not going to go there. I think he's probably going to have that mentality of, I know the place that I want to go to. And honestly, at this point, I could see the Browns being a team that is ultimately going to be trading back in this because you're going to see teams trying to trade up to this pick. But since for this particular mock, we aren't going to be doing any sort of trades, so each team has to stay where they are. And I have them selecting Abdul Carter, the edge rusher out of Penn State. The Browns, they did trade away their second edge rusher this year, and with this, you're really just needing to try to just take the best player available at this point. Again, Deshaun Watson's probably not going to play next year after re-tearing his Achilles and having to have surgery on it again. But right now, you can't pass up on some of the best players available in this class, and to ultimately move away from that would be a bad idea. And Abdul Carter, pairing him with Myles Garrett would easily create the best edge rushing tandem in the entire NFL. Obviously, you have Myles Garrett, who is going to be in the running pretty much every year for Defensive Player of the Year, and having Abdul Carter on the opposite side to learn from him and to basically have all of those free one-on-one rushes. And there's going to be plays where Myles Garrett and Abdul Carter are coming from the exact same side. That is going to be absolutely terrifying for every single AFC North team just to potentially try to deal with.
Yeah, that's the most logical pick for the Browns if they stay. But I agree with you earlier that I think they will trade out just to increase their draft capital for not just this year, but years to come, so they can start looking ahead to the end of Deshaun Watson.
Yep, moving forward to the New York Giants, they sit pretty and they get the guy that they want to draft in this class, and that's Shedeur Sanders, quarterback out of Colorado. I have a lot of concerns with Shedeur. I think he has a good arm. He doesn't have an elite arm. I think his pocket awareness is just kind of so-so. His athleticism isn't going to wow you. So he's one of those guys where he going into the NFL, I think it's going to be a very, very big learning curve for him. And the biggest thing that I have question marks on him is his leadership. There's like again, we talked about Cam Ward leaving his team halfway through a bowl game because obviously he's trying to prepare for the NFL draft. There was times when Shedeur just made boneheaded decisions this year at Colorado where I went, man, like there's going to be a lot worse scenarios every single year in the NFL that you're going to have to deal with. And if that's how you're handling it here with the Buffs, with your dad being the head coach and everything basically being perfect, I question pretty heavily some of the stuff that I'm going to see when you go to the NFL. Now, him going to the Giants, he is going to have Malik Neighbors to work with. So that is going to be a huge, huge benefit for him to deal with. Like that is going to be absolutely huge for him to throw the ball to. And it's going to make his life a little bit easier. But the Giants, they need a quarterback. They didn't change their coaching staff. So this is pretty much the coaching staff saying, we need to get this one right. And pretty much they're just hoping Shedeur Sanders can come into New York and fix all of the Giants' problems right now.
Yeah, that's just it. The Giants need a quarterback. Shedeur Sanders will be the guy. The saving grace for Shedeur is that, initially it's like, well, he doesn't have Travis Hunter anymore, but he'll have Malik Neighbors, so he's still going to have that elite wide receiver that can bail him out of some of his mistakes.
And the New England Patriots up at pick number 4. We just spoke about Travis Hunter. That's where the Patriots go with this one. And for 2 reasons. Travis Hunter is the best player in this draft. He's not the best corner in the draft. He's not the best wide receiver in the draft. But when you combine both of his abilities and what you're going to get from both of him on both of those sides, because whoever drafts him, if you choose to stick him at one position, whether it's corner or wide receiver, you're losing out on some very big value. And I think for the Patriots, they look at this, and you're Mike Vrabel, new head coach for the Patriots. You're looking at this going, we know we need to get our quarterback more help, but I'm also a defensive guy, and I know exactly what we're going to be able to do. And so by drafting Travis Hunter, he's now the number 1 weapon for Drake May, but he's also going to be the number 2 corner for the Patriots because they have Christian Gonzalez, who's going to be their number 1, and that's going to make Travis Hunter's life that much easier coming into the NFL as a corner because he's going to have to go up against number 2s as opposed to number 1s. And there's going to be situations where it's going to go, we don't have to have him out at corner every single play because we know that he's going to be so effective on the offensive side of the ball. And we know we have Christian Gonzalez, who is our number 1 corner. And this just kind of feels like a dream made in heaven for both for the Patriots because you get that really solid corner, but you also get a really good young receiver as well.
Yeah, it's a dream on paper. I think it'll rapidly turn into a nightmare though because this league is too fast, too aggressive, too physical for any player to play both sides of the ball. And so at some point, the Patriots or Travis Hunter are going to have to commit to one side of the ball because he won't be able to play through a whole NFL season doing both. And so I imagine putting him at cornerback, having a few situational opportunities where you throw him out there in a slot position, and having him on special teams would be the best, most effective way to utilize this guy.
Very fair. Moving over to pick number 5, and that is the Jacksonville Jaguars, who would have loved to have Travis Hunter fall to them at pick number 4. And the Jags are in a situation of where they could go wide receiver, they could go D-line, they could go corner. They just have a lot of holes that need to be filled. And I think ultimately they're just going to look at this and go, who's the best player available still at this point in the draft? And that has to be defensive tackle Mason Graham out of Michigan. Mason Graham, to me, is probably the best defensive tackle that we've seen enter the draft in a handful of years. Yes, I think he's better than Jalen Carter, who was a couple years ago coming out of Georgia. And adding Mason Graham to that defensive line, he's going to do a situation of where he's going to be able to stop the run at an elite level, but he's also going to be able to rush the passer from that interior. And having Josh Hines Allen also on the field as an edge rusher, that is going to be so massive. And also Trayvon Walker, who was the first overall pick a couple of years ago, you're going to have one of the best defensive lines in the entire league at that point with adding Graham there. And if you have an opportunity of where you're going to have both interior pressure and exterior pressure coming from all sides, that's going to force quarterbacks to throw the ball just that little bit sooner, a little bit quicker. And since you do have a little bit of a weaker secondary, you are going to get that little bit more help with that, just because again, the entire pocket is going to collapse from all angles and make it just a little bit easier for Jacksonville to potentially have.
Yeah, this makes sense for Jacksonville. I do agree. If Travis Hunt is somehow still on the board at number 5, that this is an ideal spot for him to land. But going for that defensive interior, there's a lot of minor holes in Jacksonville. They can plug one or two up with just best players available. That's an improvement for this team.
Next up is the Las Vegas Raiders. This is a team that I could highly see trading up in the draft with Cleveland. Again, we don't know who their head coach is going to be next year. And again, since we're not having trade up scenarios here, the Raiders, their 3 biggest needs in this class, 1 is quarterback, 2 is running back, 3 is corner. And with there not being a clear quarterback here at this spot, you need to go with the generational talent here. And you drafted Brock Bowers last year. I think you need to draft Ashton Jeanty, the running back out of Boise State this year. The Raiders have just a horrific running game last season, and that really came down to the players that they had in their backfield. They didn't have anyone that you could see being a real threat. You have Brock Bowers out there who is the receiving threat, and if you have Ashton Jeanty out there, who's going to be probably the best running back to enter the draft since Saquon Barkley, that just means that you have a true threat in the air and you have a true threat on the ground who can also catch the ball out of the backfield. That is going to help whoever you have playing quarterback, whether that's Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, or someone down the line. You instantly solve one of your biggest needs with one of the best players in the draft with Ashton Jeanty.
Yeah. This makes sense for the Raiders if they don't somehow find a way to trade up for one of those 2 quarterbacks. It has to end up being Ashton Jeanty.
Next up is the New York Jets, and the Jets are in what I like to call draft hell position because they need a quarterback. They're not going to get a quarterback. They need defensive line, and Mason Graham would have been perfect there. And I don't think they're going to go down the safety or corner route. They could here just to try to add to that secondary, but I actually think they're going to go with Tet McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona. And the reason why I think this is Davante Adams is not a young receiver anymore, and chances are the Jets might just end up trading him this offseason to get some picks back. And Garrett Wilson, I could also see the Jets floating around the idea of potentially trading away Garrett Wilson, because Garrett Wilson might just simply say, trade me. I don't want to play for you guys anymore. And there was already some discontent with Garrett Wilson this year. And it's one of those things, whoever you have at quarterback next season, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, you're having him return, you need weapons for your quarterback to throw the ball to. And with McMillan, he's a big receiver who's fast, who can get that 50-50 ball. And if you don't trade away any of your receivers and you keep Wilson and you keep Davante Adams and you add McMillan to that list, you have 3 excellent wide receivers for whoever your quarterback is going to be able to throw the ball to. And if you end up trading away, you need a wide receiver anyways. So this to me just feels like a good marriage of situations, whether he's going to be your number 3 or your number 1. Regardless, you're probably going to need to be pretty happy with that pick.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Jets. The issues are all above where the players lie, and so it really doesn't matter who they draft, in my opinion. This team, unless they sort their management out, they're going to have issues.
Next up is the Carolina Panthers, and one thing that we saw the Panthers, they did improve throughout the year with Bryce Young. I think they would have loved to have McMillan fall to them, as he's the true pure number one wide receiver in the draft. I think he's a better receiver than Travis Hunter. And I think right now they're just kind of looking at this and how do we fix our team? And one of the biggest things that they had problems with this year was their defense. I think they look at the best safety to enter the draft since Kyle Hamilton and Malachi Starks, safety out of Georgia, and they say, you know what, we have a young corner who was drafted in the first round a couple years ago that we like, and he's getting better, but these true high-level elite safeties do not come around often. And we see the difference that Kyle Hamilton is able to make for that Ravens team. And I think Starks can come in and make that difference for whatever team he goes to. And I think the Panthers, they look at that and say, yeah, we're happy to take that.
Yeah, makes sense for the Panthers. They did improve this year. You know, they're picking outside the top 5. So keep doing what you're doing, see what comes.
Next up is the New Orleans Saints. And this is a team that you can pretty much say every single position, with maybe the exception of running back, you need to find some upgrades. So at this point, it is strictly just taking best player available. And for me, best player available at this point is cornerback Will Johnson out of Michigan. He's the best pure corner in the draft. I do think he's a better corner than Travis Hunter. And you traded away Marshawn Lattimore last year. You do have Kool-Aid McKinstry, who is a phenomenal corner, but adding Will Johnson and Kool-Aid McKinstry into that same unit would make it so that you have a really, really high-level young secondary for the Saints team. And when you are the Saints, with how bad your cap situation is this year, you're going to have to clear $77 million going into the offseason. You can't afford to just simply not take best player available. And right now, it just so happens to be a corner.
Yeah, 100%. Saints all through this draft have to be best player available because they're in cap hell. They just need rookie contracts on the books.
Next up is my Chicago Bears. And this pick is incredibly simple. It's offensive line, and it's Will Campbell. Will Campbell out of LSU is the best offensive lineman in this class. He can play both left tackle and offensive guard, and that's pretty much what the Bears need. They need a hell of a lot of versatility at the offensive line, and, you know, Braxton Jones, I don't think he's necessarily a bad tackle. I think he's a replacement level tackle, but if you need to just fill up holes as best as you possibly can, if you bring in Will Campbell and he comes in and he's your left guard for this year and then he turns into your left tackle next year, I'm fine with that. You're filling up some holes, and the Bears get the best offensive lineman in the class.
Yeah. Worst position for the Bears was O-line, most needed. That's what they have to do in the first round.
Next up is the San Francisco 49ers, who I also think need to go offensive line in this class. We saw them have a lot of holes, and Trent Williams was injured this year. He is going to obviously come back and still be one of the best offensive linemen in the entire league. But I think they're going to go with Kelvin Banks Jr., the tackle out of Texas. He is probably the best pure tackle in the class. But I think if you are the 49ers, you can look at him as almost your successor plan for Trent Williams, where you have him either on the right side as your right tackle and move him from left to right. We saw that work out with Joe Alt pretty well. Or you can just say, listen, Banks, you're going to play right beside Trent Williams on the left side, and you're going to slide in to our left guard position, and you are just going to create one of the most dominant tandems in terms of our left side offensive line and really allow Brock Purdy to have all sorts of protection, because we know if Brock Purdy is able to stay up and he has healthy players around him, he's going to be an effective quarterback.
Yeah, this is the third season in a row now where we've said the most important thing for the 49ers is getting Trent Williams' replacement in the building. This is the first year of those three where they've got a good enough pick to do so. They've been picking so late in the draft that the top tackles have been gone. So now that they're in this position, they need to pull the trigger on that and get that replacement in.
Next up is the Dallas Cowboys. Now, they don't have Mike McCarthy anymore as their head coach, so it's going to be interesting to see who they bring in. But one of the biggest things that I have been saying this entire year is that they need someone other than just CeeDee Lamb as a wide receiver for Dak Prescott to throw the ball to. And it just so happens Luther Burden, the third out of Missouri, happens to be there. He's a great route runner. I think he would be an elite number 2 to have with CeeDee Lamb, and you're allowing Dak Prescott to have a handful of high level weapons to throw the ball to, and you're really making that Cowboys offense start to get a little bit scarier. Granted, Nico Dowdles, I don't think is an elite running back, and if you can find a way to get another running back here in this class, you can really make that offense start to hum.
Yeah, wide receiver at this position has to be their biggest need. If somehow Ashton Genty falls this far in the draft, that should be the guy they go for, because it is that running back spot with Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott. It was not very good at all. They need to upgrade that.
Next up is the Miami Dolphins, and for me, this is a very simple pick. You need to keep Tua upright, and you need to keep him as healthy as you possibly can, and that needs to be offensive line. And Josh Simmons, the tackle from Ohio State, is one of the better offensive linemen in this class, and he did battle with a little bit of injury problems himself, but you can put him at guard, you can put him at tackle. Ultimately, he is going to be a great pick for Miami because, again, if Tua's hurt, this Miami team struggles immensely.
100%. They need to find ways to protect Tua. So sometimes they need to find ways to protect him from himself, but this is the most they can do, unfortunately, is bring in a new O-lineman.
The Colts, I don't think they have a great quarterback, but they have a lot of issues here on the defensive side of the ball. This is going to be one of those teams where I would say their first 3 round picks all need to be on the defense side of the ball. Just try to get it as built up as humanly possible. And for that, I think they end up taking Nick Scorton, the edge rusher out of Texas A&M. Granted, they did draft an edge rusher last year with their first round pick. Scorton, he's a little bit more of that kind of run stop edge rusher where he's going to be really effective at stopping the run, but he's also going to have upside as a pass rusher. And to get run stopping in this league, especially in the AFC where there are a lot of really talented backs throughout that, just getting any sort of defensive help that you possibly can is going to be critical. And I think getting defensive help on the trenches, on the lines, is a really, really good way to build it.
Yeah, Colts are in sort of that limbo position for drafting in those early to mid-teens where it's really tough. Just best player available, shore up that defense. That's really all they can do.
Yeah, next pick coming up here, that is going to be linebacker slash edge rusher out of Georgia. That is going to be Jalen Walker going to the Falcons. The Falcons need both linebacker help and they also need edge rushing help, as they are one of the worst edge rushing units in the entire NFL this year. Walker has that little bit of Micah Parsons to him, of where he can kind of play both roles, and he's almost kind of like that Walmart brand Micah Parsons, where it's still good, but it's maybe not necessarily like the Gucci level. And when you need both positions and you can get 2 for the price of 1, of where there's going to be certain plays where he's playing the linebacker spot and there's going to be other plays where he's coming off of the edge to rush the passer, the Falcons, they just need that level of player right now. And with Michael Penix looking like he could maybe be something, and with just the absurd contract that they're going to have to deal with Kirk Cousins, they need some of these young guys that can be kind of 2 players for the price of 1.
Yeah, 100%. And defense is what the Falcons focus on this draft too.
Arizona Cardinals could have a situation of where they could go a handful of different ways with this spot, but ultimately I think the building up the amount of weapons for Kyler Murray is going to be a big, big factor here. And Emeka Egbuka, he is a very, very talented route runner, former teammate of last year's 4th overall pick, Marvin Harrison Jr. And I think if you just allow the Cardinals to continue to build up weapons and really give Kyler Murray just the most amount of talent around him, it's going to make his life a hell of a lot easier. And the Cardinals, again, they can go a lot of different spots here, but I think this is a very solid move for them to go down.
Yeah, this is a tough one for the Cardinals because we've talked about it all season. They need to improve defense. But when you can get a guy and pair him with another former teammate. It just creates a little bit more cohesion on that offensive unit. And if Kyler Murray's still the quarterback next year of the Cardinals, then that's definitely what they need to be focusing.
Speaking of another team that needs to really just focus on defense, that's the Cincinnati Bengals. The biggest problem that they had all year long was their defense, and they need probably every single unit of the defense of improvement, but I'm giving them Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle out of Michigan. We talked about his teammate earlier being probably one of the best defensive tackles that we've seen in terms of the edge rushing and run stopping. Kenneth Grant is a monster in the run stopping game. And you put him in the middle, having Trey Hendrickson on the other side or on the outside, you're not really worrying about teams running up the middle because you have this big behemoth of a man that's going to be able to close up run lanes. And again, whoever you draft on the defensive side of the ball for this Bengals team is going to improve this. But when you can get a big mauler up the middle, that's going to really help, especially going up against a Derrick Henry or a Najee Harris or whoever the Browns are going to have, because it's no longer going to be Nick Chubb. But just getting some of that interior run stopping is going to be huge for the Bengals.
Yeah. Bengals are defense.
Next up, this is the Seattle Seahawks. And again, this is kind of one of those weird spots where earlier in the year, it looked like tackle was going to be a situation for them, like offensive tackle. It could have been an area where they could go. I think they're actually going to go with an edge rusher here at this point because they do need a little bit of edge rushing help. It's kind of felt all year long where it's only been really one player that's been able to get after the quarterback. And I think Michael Williams of Georgia is going to be able to come in for the Seahawks and just add that little bit of extra help on the outside. They did draft a D tackle in the first round last year. I think this basically just completes their defensive line and really makes that a solid unit for years and years to come.
Yeah, defense is what they need. The only other position of need for the Seahawks is quarterback, but as we talked, there's nothing available here, so it has to be best defensive player available.
Next pick coming up, this is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and for a while, I have definitely been mocking them to go after a wide receiver in this class because Mike Evans has definitely, he's older, and you're not sure if Chris Godwin is going to be returning to the team or how healthy he's going to be returning to the team, but I think defense is definitely going to take a priority for this team. And Jack Sawyer, the edge rusher out of Ohio State, has just been a really, really fun player to watch. I think whatever team he goes to, he's just going to be one of those guys. He's not going to be, double digit 15 sacks type guy. He's just going to be one of those guys that's going to go out there. He's going to get 7 to 9 sacks a year, who's just going to be a constant threat. And I think that's kind of the player this Bucs defense needs here at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I would not be surprised to see them take a wide receiver to shore up that wide receiver room with Evans and Godwin being aging and injured. But defense makes sense for this Bucs team as well.
Next up is the Denver Broncos here at pick number 20. It's simple. They just need more pass catchers for Bo Nix. But one thing we do know about Sean Payton is he does like to run the ball, and I think Tyler Warren, he is without a doubt the best tight end in this class. He's been compared to Gronkowski. He is one of those guys that can just go out there. He can be a mauler in the run game. He's very, very fun to watch with his improvisation in terms of route running. And I think Sean Payton is going to be able to design and scheme up some players that really are plays that really allow Warren to get open. He's a monster of a man. If I'm just taking a look here, I'm pretty sure he's 6'6", 261 pounds. He's going to run a good 40 time. This is a fun player for me to watch, and I think the Broncos would love to bring him in.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense, especially for Sean Payton, Bo Nix, and just getting any player that can be both a playmaker and an outlet option, a check down option for Bo Nix is very key for this Broncos team.
Next up is your Pittsburgh Steelers, and There's a lot of different areas I could go with this. I could give them another corner to just kind of shore up that secondary. I could give them a running back here because we know that Najee Harris might be on his way out. But I think it's pretty simple. They need to get wide receiver help, and that is Matthew Golden. He's from Texas. He's been a little bit slept on this year, where he's definitely started to fly up the boards a lot more. He's shown off some of that skill as a route runner, and whether you have George Pickens back next year or not, you need to have another wide receiver in this room, and Golden will be someone that's going to be able to catch a lot of balls and have some really good route running, and you just simply need more offensive help.
Yeah, wide receiver has to be the number one focus for the Steelers in the first round this year. Does he have any behavioral issues? Because if not, then I don't know if the Steelers will want him.
I have not heard any behavioral issues, so that might be the only red flag for the Steelers, which whoever
Right.
would have thought that would have been a red flag to not have behavioral issues, but that's the way that the Steelers like to go. But maybe, just maybe, they're starting to turn that leaf and start and get some of those Hines Ward type players back in, of where it's just a good wide receiver alongside with being just a good person.
Right? We can hope.
Next up is the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, there's a big rumor going around that Khalil Mack is going to retire at the end of this year. And with Joey Bosa also probably maybe not being there next year, it could be very easy to draft a guy on the edge side of the ball. But Jim Harbaugh knows he needs to get his quarterback weapons, because we saw that in the final playoff game this year for them, where they just did not have enough weapons to get it done. It was, if we stop Lad McConkey, we can ultimately win this game. And there just happens to be a tight end available in Colson Loveland out of Michigan that Harbaugh knows quite well, and he's going to be a phenomenal pass catcher. He's going to be able to help out in the run game. He's pretty much exactly what Harbaugh is going to want, and this is pretty much a pick made in heaven for this Chargers team.
Yeah, 100%. I see them going exactly this way because while they'll need to fill those gaps of Bosa and Mack and other spots on the defense, those are spots that you could fill in the second, third, fourth rounds serviceably for the next few years until you can get a star again. But yeah, help for Justin Herbert is the number one priority for the Chargers.
Next up is the Green Bay Packers, and they've had a lot of injuries to their wide receiver room. Unfortunately for them, there's not really a wide receiver of value here at this spot. But they also have a pretty bad secondary, of where it's pretty much Jair Alexander. And I don't even think Jair Alexander is even a top 15 corner anymore. So you need to upgrade that room. And they get Benjamin Morrison, who is a corner from Notre Dame. He's been very productive this year. Hell, he's going to be playing in the national championship game on Monday or the Monday prior to. So after this video comes out, he's been a phenomenal player. And by adding Morrison into this room, it's at least going to help Jair Alexander be a little bit less pressure on him. And with all the wide receivers in this NFC North, the Packers need to shore up that secondary.
Yeah. That's exactly the need for the Packers, is that defense, and especially that defensive secondary.
Next up is the Minnesota Vikings, who it's interesting to see where they're going to go with this pick, because could they go offensive line? Could they go defense? I actually have them going Amari Hampton, the running back out of North Carolina. We know Kevin O'Connell likes to run the ball, and with Aaron Jones being a little bit more of an age back and only signing that 1-year deal, Hampton is the clear number 2 running back in this class, and getting him there, and if you are able to re-sign Aaron Jones, you're going to be able to have a really good 1-2 punch. And I think for a young quarterback like what we're going to see with JJ McCarthy next year, if he is the starter, having 2 or at least just Hampton as a really good running back will be a nice way to make his transition into the NFL an easy one.
Yeah, at this position, I do think that the running back is the most needed item for the Vikings in the first round.
Next up is the Houston Texans. Houston Texans, their biggest need the entire year has been offensive line. And when CJ Stroud is the second most sacked quarterback in the entire NFL, that's a problem, because we've seen him struggle with keeping the football secure or just simply making bad decisions when he's throwing the football. And Josh Corley Jr., tackle out of Oregon, I think he is going to be a guy that's going to be flying up draft boards after the Senior Bowl. I think you're probably going to see him even a little bit higher up on this list. But for right now, that is kind of where he is. And while the Texans don't need a tackle, this is a guy that you could very easily slide into that guard position or just be a tackle, or keep him at tackle and move one of your previous tackles into that guard spot and really just try to shore up that offensive line just that little bit more for him.
Yep, just like the Bears, number one need for the Texans is offensive line. That's what they have to do. Best available at that position, they need to take.
Next up is the Los Angeles Rams, and there could be a lot of different spots this team goes. Could they go with a tackle? Could they go with some extra D linemen? I actually have them going with Shavon Ravel, the corner out of East Carolina. I think he's the second best pure corner in the draft, and I think a lot more teams are going to really be intrigued with him because he was phenomenal at East Carolina this last year. And we've seen some of these smaller school guys over the last couple seasons. It doesn't necessarily matter that they're playing lesser competition. They've just been locked down. Again, Sauce Gardner, he came from Cincinnati. And then a few years ago with Devin Witherspoon, we saw him come from Illinois, where it doesn't necessarily matter necessarily the competition, but some of these smaller school guys have been really popping off, and they've just shown that they are phenomenal corners, and I think the Rams could use a top-end corner to really make that defense look really good. They were able to replace Aaron Donald in the aggregate with their 2 first-round picks last year, or their first 2 picks last year, and just getting a top-tier corner will be instrumental for them.
100%. Yeah, the defensive secondary is a big need for the Rams. The only other position that they really need to start addressing at some point here, again, not really much available at this point, and that's the quarterback position. They got to find that Matt Stafford replacement. Wouldn't shock me to see them try to trade in this draft to get into a position to take a quarterback or even reach on one in their first or second rounds just to try and get a guy that Sean McVay wants.
Yeah. Next up is the Washington Commanders, and again, this is just one of those teams where you could see them going a handful of different ways. Could it be a wide receiver? Could it be an offensive lineman? I actually have them taking an edge rusher because they traded away both of their starting edge rushers last year, and they really haven't had much from an edge standpoint in terms of being able to really have some good defensive success. And I have them selecting James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee. He, at one point, was looked at as a top 5 pick in this class. He fell at some points down to the 3rd round, but I think everyone's quickly realized this kid is really, really talented. You're gonna get a lot of Jared Verse type vibes from him. And Washington, if they can just get that number 1 edge rusher that they can rely on, they already have the defensive tackles, so you're gonna have pressure coming up the middle. And Pierce Jr. is just gonna be a nice player to just kind of have on that edge side and really help that side of the ball.
Yeah, it's at this position the bigger need for Washington is to get that defense a little bit more help, because you can get a wide receiver later on in the draft. You can find an O lineman possibly in free agency. At this position, get that defense.
Next up is the Baltimore Ravens, and like I've been saying for these last few teams, there's a lot of different spots that they can go to. I think the Ravens, they have one of the worst secondaries in football other than Kyle Hamilton. They have been atrocious this year. But that's not where I'm going to go with this pick, because there's a decent chance they could be losing Ronnie Stanley to free agency this year. He's a free agent. Do the Ravens necessarily, or can they afford to keep him, especially with teams like the Commanders or the Bears, or, there's going to be a list of other players that are going to be, or teams looking to get his services. So I think they're ultimately going to say, we're going to be comfortable allowing you to walk, and we're going to draft a tackle in the 1st round, and that's going to be Armand Membo, tackle out of Missouri. And it's just going to be a situation for them where they're just able to just find that replacement, and it's not like they don't need offensive line help anyways. So this is just one of those things of where they're replacing a guy that they could potentially be losing, but if they don't lose Ronnie Stanley in free agency, this is just improving their offensive line, making Lamar Jackson's life easier, and sure as hell making Derrick Henry's life easier as well.
Yeah, it does make sense, this pick. I do think the two biggest needs for this Ravens team is defensive secondary and wide receiver. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them go either of those positions if there's something available too.
Nor would I. Next up is the Buffalo Bills, and I have them selecting Walter Nolan, the defensive tackle out of Ole Miss. And he's one of those guys, once we get past the two defensive tackles from Michigan, it's kind of pick your poison. And when I look at Nolan, he's one of those guys that's maybe a little bit more on the side of a Mason Graham as opposed to a Grant, who was selected by the Bengals. He's a guy that's going to be able to be a little bit more of that pass rusher type defensive tackle. And that's kind of one of the things I think this Bills team needs a little bit more of. They could go wide receiver here, but I think they're going to go with interior pass rush with Nolan.
Yeah, I think the Bills are happy with what their offense has right now. It's young, it's talented, and Josh Allen has shown that he's able to get the job done with what he has. They need defense to sort of make it so the Bills don't have to score 35 points a game.
Philadelphia Eagles are up next here on our list, and there's no Georgia Bulldog defender here at this pick that they can pick at this point, so they're probably actually a little bit upset about that. But I actually have them still selecting an edge rusher, and that is Shamar Stewart, the edge rusher out of Texas A&M. He's again one of those more bigger edge rushers that's going to be able to work out, and we know how Howie Roseman likes to work. If it's not on the trenches in the first round, chances are he's probably not going to go, or chances are he's going to go in the trenches with one of those picks. And the Eagles haven't had the best edge rushers this year, so just adding that little bit extra on the edge will be a nice thing for them to have. And again, when you're the Eagles at this point with all the players that you have on your team, you can afford to add another edge rusher late in the first round just because, again, like, you can afford to make these types of moves just because of how stacked your team is.
100%. Like that makes sense. No position is outside the realm of possibility for the Eagles where they're at with the talent they have.
Next up here is the Kansas City Chiefs, and I have them selecting tackle slash guard Wyatt McMillan, the tackle out of West Virginia. This is a guy that's very similar to a Will Campbell, of where he is both athletic enough to play tackle and guard. I think he'd probably be a better guard in the NFL than he would be a tackle, but the Chiefs are going to look at him and say, hey, we need tackle help here. And you have played left tackle at West Virginia at a dominating level. So guess what? You get to protect the blind side of Patrick Mahomes coming into the NFL. And again, if they, for instance, if the Chiefs somehow manage to, let's say, sign Ronnie Stanley, they can just add this kid and say, we're either going to throw him on the right side or we're going to put him in the interior and just have just an elite offensive line again.
Yeah, makes sense for the Chiefs. I mean, that O line or else something in the defensive secondary are the two that are most logical for them.
And the final pick of this particular video before we get into round two in the next video, this is the Detroit Lions, and I think they're going to go edge rusher here, and I'm selecting Princely Uman, not even going to try to attempt to say that last name, out of Ole Miss. He was phenomenal at Ole Miss this year, had 11 sacks so far on the season, and as much as the Lions want to talk about Aiden Hutchinson coming back for the Super Bowl if they make the Super Bowl, I think that would be a mistake, and I don't think he will play in the Super Bowl even if they make it there. I don't know if we're ever going to see Aiden Hutchinson play back to that level that we saw from Aiden Hutchinson because of that leg injury. That's not an easy thing to come back from fully. Even if he does, you need a second edge rusher to give some help there, and Princely, he is going to be a really good player if Aiden Hutchinson does get back to that, or he doesn't. You just need to get someone on that opposite side to really make that edge rushing room good. And plus, with how many edge rushers they have been down to this point this year, just adding another one of those young super talented guys to just build up that room is not a bad idea by any stretch of the imagination.
No, depth and talent on defense is what the Detroit Lions need going forward. So that makes sense. Because, yeah, you're right. Aiden Hutchinson, he may never be the same guy again after that kind of an injury. He could still be competitive, but he's not going to be a top dog in this league anymore.
Thank you all very much for watching this first round mock draft. Make sure to stick around for tomorrow's video where it's going to be round 2. But till then, peace.